Hi, everybody. Welcome to Venture Talks. This is Jack Miner. I'm the Chief Investment Officer with TEDCO, and I'm delighted to have Dr. Joe Cunningham joining us today. And we had, at least I had the privilege of working with Joe. I'm not sure if it was reciprocated that he was privileged to work with me when I was at Cleveland Clinic, but learned an awful lot working with him, and I'm delighted to introduce him to you and have a conversation with Joe here today. So Joe, if you don't mind, a little bit of your background to kick things off.
Sure, Jack. It's good to see you. So I'm Joe Cunningham. I'm a physician by background, practiced medicine for nearly 15 years in a variety of settings, from solo practice to small group to larger group. Ended up running a pretty large group, about 350 physicians. Went back, got an MBA, ended up as a chief medical officer for the Ascension system, which is a very large healthcare system, and did that for over a decade. During that time, learned a lot about how large systems work. And one of the things I learned was that it's very hard for large systems to bring innovation into the system. I'm sure many of you have read Clayton Christensen's The Innovator's Dilemma. And the problem is that the three guys in the garage with nothing to lose can also always out-innovate a large system that has been successful and which therefore has a huge incentive to do today what was successful for them yesterday rather than taking the risk on doing something different. And because of that, the CEO of the Ascension system, Doug French, and I started a corporate venture fund at Ascension called Ascension Health Ventures to try to bring innovation into the system. And we felt that venture capital was a good way to get a look into the future of what was happening in technology and innovation to allow us to participate in that kind of innovation, but really and mainly to create a culture that got up each day and looked at what problems existed, what the pain points were, and how you could find and create solutions to those pain points. And that became a passion and a focus of mine and really a life pursuit. And just to sort of complete that story, Doug and I ended up leaving Ascension. We didn't get fired. We just decided we wanted to pursue that. We left together to pursue innovation, ended up joining a venture firm called Santé Ventures. And then a few years later, with one of the Austin Venture partners, Kevin Lalonde, going out and raising our own venture fund, Santé Ventures, and we're still at that now, nearly 20 years later.
That's awesome. So give me the details on Santé Ventures, assets under management, minimum investment size, that type of thing.
Sure. So I'd say to start that, let me give you a little primer on the alternative asset private equity group, because that often gets blurred and it can confuse the issue. Alternative investments, private equity, private investments, private companies is obviously a big asset class. A lot of people blur those two together, and when you're doing your MBA, they teach the classes together in the same course, but they're different things. Private equity tends to be, there's a company, they have cash flow, they have revenue, they have customers, they have products, and those tend to be traded as multiples of either the revenue or of the EBITDA or the profit, et cetera. And so that's a business, but it's not the business we're in. We're in venture, and then within venture, we're in early stage venture. And early stage venture is generally when we show up, there's a technology. We work with academic medical centers, medical schools, universities, and we find technology. And occasionally there's an existing group with that technology, but most of the time there's not. And so we're building a team, we're putting capital into that team, and we're starting almost from scratch or from scratch this new technology and building that and growing that, which is often a 7, 10, 15-year process to build a company around that technology. And we'll talk some more about that. And so our first investments tend to be $5 to $10 million. And that dictates somewhat what your fund size is. So now back to answer your question. we've been at this a long time where we have 4 funds. We also have some alternative investment strategies, a hedge fund strategy, and that's driven by artificial intelligence, a crypto strategy. But our bread and butter and the thing that we dedicate most of our time and effort into is early stage life science healthcare venture. That can be biotech, medical device, or health tech, which is healthcare IT and services. All told, we have just over $1 billion under management, and most of that is within the early stage healthcare venture practice.
In the crypto fund, is that blockchain or cryptocurrency or both? What's the focus on that?
It's both. It's really a strategy around a new technology, a new vision of what currency means. And so we, as in everything else that we go into, we go deep into the science, we go deep into the technology, and we go deep into the economic theory behind it. And so that's the play that we're making. So it is, if you think of, boy, this is a hot sector, why don't you get into that? We're not that. We are always way deeper than that. And that kind of leads into thoughts on our investment thesis behind healthcare. I've been at this now for a long time. And during my career, I've seen times when biotech was radioactive. Nobody would invest in it. People had lost tons of money. And so it was just a dead sector. And obviously, more recently, I've seen times when people had biotech only funds and they were doing great. And, it was really hard for anybody that wasn't doing biotech to compete in life science, healthcare technology, because they were doing so well. It's a cyclical business. And we're seeing that again now with biotech. Same thing with medical device. I've seen medical device when it was radioactive, nobody was investing. And then we've done very well with medical device. And the same thing with healthcare services and healthcare tech. What we've seen most recently are a lot of investors that are not specialized in healthcare, that are not specialized in technology, that think of health tech as a vertical of software and technology, have put a lot of money into that sector. And so the prices have gone up way high. And in my opinion, therefore, it's been a more difficult place to invest in of recent. But everything's cyclical. By investing across the sector and by our firm having real expertise across that sector of science, technology, healthcare delivery, the payer side, the provider side, the hospitals and physicians, et cetera, we feel like we can survey that entire spectrum and invest in the areas that make sense. And to us, make sense and involves several different things. Massively improved outcomes at less cost. So we are not interested in doing things that add a bell or a whistle and charge more. We're not interested in doing things that are a quarter turn of the screw. We're interested in solving massive pain points. And unfortunately, the reason we're interested in that is because of all the scars and tattoos I have on my back of trying to do other things. Yeah. There's nothing worse than spending the time and the money and the effort and the years developing something that you then have to convince somebody they have a problem. It's way better to invest in something that is addressing such a massive problem, such a massive pain point, such a massive critical need, that if you can fix that problem, you don't have to convince people that it needed to be fixed. And it's the hits business. I'm much more likely to sell one company for $500 million that I own half of and return my entire fund than I am to sell 5 companies that I own 10% of. And so that's why we go early. We're the first institutional investor almost every time. We own big amounts of the company, and we solve pain points that, if they're successful, we can sell and return a significant multiple of our entire fund. So we're not the guys that, there's 15 guys and we'll throw in and give, 5 or 10% along with a bunch of other people. That's a business, but that's not our business.
Yeah. And you kind of sticking with that theme, as a MD, MBA, venture capital professional, I have to think that when you look at a technology, especially coming out of an academic medical center, you have an outsized view of the value of those technologies. So an entrepreneur probably can't kid you that the problem that they're solving is a big problem when it is not a big problem. Do you find that? I mean, do you find that you really have an opportunity to look at things differently from that perspective?
Sure. And by the way, why I enjoy doing what I'm doing, I love entrepreneurs, I love inventors, and I love people that get up and when they see a problem, instead of wringing their hands and saying, "Oh, wow, that's terrible," say, wonder what I could do about that. So I love these guys that I get to deal with. At the same time, they're busy, they have day jobs, they've learned an awful lot to be experts in some area. And that area generally is not what I do, which is pattern recognition of looking over and over and over. We've looked at thousands and thousands of deals over the time. We get to see not only what they're doing, but often what 6 other people are doing to address that same pain point. And it gives us a perspective. And so generally that scientist inventor has a very specific point of view about what he's created and where that fits in. Part of our job is to get the other perspectives in that space. So we read all the literature, we find out who publishes the most articles in that space, what's the literature say, and who are the KOLs, who are the key opinion leaders in that space. And we get on an airplane and fly wherever in the world they are and sit down and with them. And a nice thing about being a venture capitalist is they will tend to take a meeting with you. They'll tend to have a cup of coffee with you. And so you get to talk about that. And so that's how we get a perspective. Now, obviously, we don't do that thousands and thousands and thousands of times. We've been at it long enough that most of the time we eliminate things without doing that. But if we're really interested, due diligence is all the way to that of getting a real world perspective on how this technology or this solution or this particular approach to a problem interacts with the market, interacts with other competing technologies, and how big a market that is, how big an addressable market that is. I see lots of technologies that it's a better mousetrap. It's better technology. It would be far better if that was the technology that we used. And yet it doesn't fit into the market. And I won't name any names, but just because you build a better electronic medical record doesn't mean that you're going to win market share in the electronic medical record system. It's not a fair playing field. Just because you build a better IV pump doesn't mean you're going to be able to win market share in IV pumps. The contracts are deliberately done in a way to prevent competition from coming in. Same way with health insurance. And so you have to have not a superficial, but a deep understanding of the nuances of these markets to really understand the addressable market of whatever particular pain point that you're trying to address.
Yeah, it's so complicated. I'm actually having a little PTSD from our investment committee meetings that we have this conversation at the clinic. But it's not just the technology. Then you've got regulatory, FDA. Then you've got the payer, provider, the clinician, supply chain, and then the business itself. And I hope that I learned that all well from you, that, you can't make a decision in life sciences by just saying, man, that's the best, the best scalpel ever, because supply chain is just not going to add the SKU to it. And, health IT, same way, trying to get in on a stack of new technologies that the CIO has a 3-year backlog on. It's super challenging. So what recommendation would you give to a startup life sciences entrepreneur about how to get into healthcare as a customer?
So I think you have to start with a pain point And you have to be addressing a problem that, again, is so massive that you're not going to have to convince anybody that that's a problem worth addressing. And here's the hard part. You need to have the right people to address that problem. And that can be really hard for a startup. The chances that the inventor, that the scientist, that the doctor, that whoever that is the right person to do all the jobs that need to be done is pretty small. And that's not an indictment of their character or their intelligence or their wisdom. It's just that that's a lot of different disparate skill sets. And so to have a successful company, you need to have a source of innovation. You need to have a manager, administrator that can just pay the bills and run the organization. And you need to have an entrepreneur that understands how to create value against high odds to address a pain point. And there are people that are all of those, and you tend to know their names because it's so rare to find those that they become famous. But most of the time, you have one of those skills and you put together a team that can do all those skills. But you can't do that as a doctor or a scientist or an entrepreneur and with no funding and no money. And so that's where we can come in. It's because if you just hire the person that's willing to go to work for a startup that has no resources, no money, the chances of that being the best person in the world to compete in the NFL of this marketplace isn't very good. And the best and the brightest are not liable to come to work for the company unless they have institutional venture funding to give them stability and to give them the networks and the other things that we can do. And so that's a big part of what we do. And so if we can find the pain point and we can find the technology and we answer one of those, a source of innovation or a manager or an entrepreneur, then we can, on a level that they often couldn't do on themselves, fill out and build out that team and well capitalize that company to give it a chance.
Yeah. And I was just going to offer a testimonial on how well you did that. I won't mention her last name, but Dr. Nancy, when I was working on rural healthcare, and you said, call Dr. Nancy, she knows more and has forgotten more about rural health than anybody I know. She was hugely helpful to us in the project we were working on. So I think that, that network that groups like Santé Ventures can provide is well worth. I don't want to say it, but it might be worth more than the money. It's really valuable.
We hope so. We often do deals where we weren't the best term sheet at the table. Part of our obviously, we all have deep backgrounds in healthcare and in science and technology, so we can go as deep as you want to go in those spaces. We have networks of that, and a unique part of the Santé investment profile is that while a lot of our money are traditional institutional investors, we also have a lot of the large national health systems that are investors in us that are also, just as we did back in our days of dissension, looking to us to help them with their strategic vision, with what's new on the horizon, with what are the changes. And so we have that investor base of health systems, of physician groups, of insurers that help us to keep a broad perspective on the marketplace.
Can we talk about that without, I don't want to put you in a difficult position there, because I know that those relationships are not only really important to you, but sometimes politically charged. And, when you look at working with a payer organization or provider organization or physician groups, I think what I see anyway is there's a real need to bridge the problem and the solutions and do that in such a way that isn't a waste of people's time. I think that just my opinion is that that's why some academic medical centers have put up walls, because 90% of the time it's a solution in search of a problem, and that's just not appropriate for the clinicians to spend their time on that. But have you run into 2 or 3 magic bullets that you can talk about that work really well within those organizations?
So I'd say this: very often, new technologies are going to completely disrupt the cash cow current profit centers of very large organizations. Often, because of our investor base, we are investing in technologies that are going to significantly disrupt the profit cash cow centers of our investors. They have to know that and understand that going in. Very often, those disruptions are going to take place whether we're doing it or not, whether they're invested in it or not. And so having the understanding and knowledge and background of what's going to happen to them can be very useful to them from a strategic purpose and can help them think about how they're going to need to transform their business in order to survive. Everybody has seen all the studies about, you look at the Fortune 50 in 1997 and you look at the Fortune 50 today, and not only is it not the same 50, but a lot of the 50 from 1997 no longer exist. That's the nature of business. We're not in the train business, we're in the transportation business, all those cliches. And so we can help them think about that. We have existed for a lot of my professional career in a period of time in a realm where hospitals had the money and the command of the healthcare system, the leverage, in order to be a dominant player in the healthcare system. Physicians less so, and payers less so. Then payers had sort of their heyday and they increased their leverage and they consolidated and they moved over into the provider space. United Healthcare is the largest primary care provider in the country. You had all this blurring. My prediction is that hospitals leverage is on the way down. More and more of the care that we deliver does not require bricks and mortar ICUs and inpatient. We're just, instead of doing fee for service, you're seeing value-based reimbursement. All the parts that make up this system are changing. And so that's, for us, huge opportunity. But it's also completely disruptive to a lot of existing players. And one thing about disruption is that you have to really think through these things carefully and really be careful, because generally there will be successful, prominent, huge companies that navigated that, and there will be hundreds, if not thousands, of carcasses along the path that didn't successfully navigate that. So it's not for the faint of heart. But if you don't do anything, that's almost a guaranteed outcome that you will fail if you don't do anything, because the market is going to innovate. It's going to change. It's going to transform, and you're either with it or you're dying.
Do you think that telehealth is here to stay across the board, or only in certain disciplines?
I think it's here to stay across the board, not with quite the way that it exists right now. A lot of it driven by COVID. For me, it's hard. I know pretty well, unfortunately, how to get $1 in revenue on a consumer-facing device by spending $10 in marketing sales. Much harder for me to get $10 for spending $1 in markets and sales. And so it's a lot of nuance to those businesses. If you think of the old Chinese game of chess, and the guy that invented chess famously, he took it to the premier of China and he showed him how, and he said, "Oh, this is just wonderful. This is great. To reward you, you can have anything you want." And he said, "Well, if I could just, take the chessboard and have a grain of rice on the first square and 2 grains of rice on the second square and 4 on the third, and you just go through the chessboard, that's what I want." And I said, "Can't believe that's all you'd want. I was going to offer you a whole bunch. Okay, have it be done." Of course, as we know, by the time you get to the end of the chessboard, that's more rice than's ever been grown in the history of civilization. So it couldn't be done. But and that didn't work out well for the guy. So the premier had him executed instead. So you got to be careful what you ask for. But the a more important point in some ways is by the time you get to the end of the first half of the chessboard, that amount of rice is about the size of an M1 tank. And you go through the next line, it's the size of the Himalayas. And so we can kind of, our minds can grasp how much that is as the size of an M1 tank. And up to that first half of the chessboard, we have some human capacity to understand that. We lose that capacity when you get into that second half of the chessboard. Yeah. When you look at computing power, Moore's law, computing power, and you kind of make that analogy, we're just now to the end of the first half of the chessboard. And so the increases in computing power that we're seeing, the power of artificial intelligence, it's really hard for us to fathom. And so we grasp onto little things that seem really amazing and impressive, self-driving cars and computers that can talk to us and we think they're human and these things, but they're all kind of rough around the edges. And we think, yeah, it's okay, but it's not mind-boggling. We're going to mind-boggling really, really quickly within people's lifetimes. We're at mind-boggling on how artificial intelligence is going to transform every aspect of our life. And in healthcare, especially so. Yeah. When I trained as a doctor, the way you trained was you just memorized everything known up to that point and boom, you were a doctor. But there wasn't that much to know. It's sort of to use 2 leeches for that or 3, right? And so we know a lot more now and you can't just memorize everything. And so how you train doctors has to change, how doctors think, how they function, what their role is in healthcare delivery. All of that is changing at a very rapid pace. And that's both threat to the status quo and huge opportunity as we look to see ways to do that better, to find ways to do that better. And by the way, do it cheaper. And, when you're spending $3 trillion a year on the US on healthcare to do a bad job, the economics are going to work out fine to do a better job at less cost.
Where do you think the investment industry is headed with, the market as of today is pretty soft. It feels like LPs are getting nervous, which makes the general managers or the managing directors a bit nervous. I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of Santé, but just kind of looking into a crystal ball. You've seen in the 4 funds that you've had, you've seen economic up and down. What is your feeling on this current maybe the next 2 years?
If you look at any individual LP, whether that's a pension fund or a healthcare system or any other family office, whatever, there's lots of dynamics that impact that. There's personalities, there's leverage, there's hierarchies, there's all sorts of things. And so it's hard to each one is so individualized, it's hard to comment on that. But there's some broad things that I think are useful. One, we are an advantage and a curse. We are an illiquid investment. People give us the money for 10 years, often 12 or 15. And we're a long-term investment. That means we need to outperform the stock market. You need to get paid for that illiquid investment. And any venture firm that's not outperforming the stock market was a bad investment. And so we need to have good returns, but they're not short-term. The advantage of that is that gives you some insulation from the fluctuations in the short-term market. You don't have to sell that company this year. You can sell it in 2 years or 3 years. Companies are bought, not sold, and so that tends to respond to when the market's better. And so we are not as susceptible to fluctuations in the market and in the shorter term, in the year or 2 term, because of that illiquidity. On the other hand, you make the investment in us, and 3 years later, you really, really need liquidity. We're still not liquid just because you need it. So that it's a put and take, but we are pretty insulated from the market variations because of that illiquidity, of the fact that we're long-term, and we sell the companies when they're right to be sold, and market kind of dictates that. So I think that early stage life science healthcare venture is a very good place to invest. A question that comes up is, are you better off doing a general fund that's just investing across a sector as part of a broader, diverse group, or are you better off having a specialized firm? And they've attempted to study that. And as in many things, those studies can kind of justify whatever preconceived answer that you wanted them to have. You can find examples where the general firms do just as well as the specialized firms. You have to dig deep to find that out. So clearly I have a bias, but I will tell you that going back to our principles of owning a large percentage of the company, meaning we go in really early, and therefore our hits are very liable to return the fund. You can't do that particular strategy without being specialized, because if you're going to be the first institutional investor in, if you're going to own a big percentage of the company on a relatively small amount of capital, you've got to have a deep understanding of the space. So our strategy requires you to be specialized. Our strategy requires you to be early stage, and our strategy has been successful for us. And so we're going to keep doing that and not try to solve all the other parts of the financial system.
I know at the early stages of COVID, the focus was more on the portfolio, though, than new investments. Do you see maybe a potentially similar trend there with portfolios generally, or not really? It's just a long-term investment.
So certainly COVID changed how we did business, but because as a $260 million firm fund doing 18 to 20 investments in that, we end up doing about 4 or 5 investments a year. And that didn't really change during COVID. The journey of how we came to Yes changed somewhat with more virtual visits, but we didn't actually see any change in our investment during COVID because of the way and the nature that we do business, and the fact that we're investing for technologies that will take years to develop.
You make an early investment. Sounds like you might be the first check-in on some, or at least the lead investor in some early stage
Almost
investments.
all the time, we're the first investment. We're always the lead, and often we're doing company formation and building teams. Yes.
So from the team's perspective, what's the best way for them to lose your trust? I can ask it the positive way, but it's probably easier to understand the negative way.
So I would say we come at that with a little different perspective. I'll give you a story that kind of illustrates that. A very large, really well-known institution of higher learning that everybody knows recently asked me to give a talk to their engineers and MBAs, and their premise of the way they wanted that done was that they would give a team of engineers and MBA students a term sheet from a VC, and then they had the faculty come in and they watched the students negotiate that term sheet with the VC, and then they graded the students on how well they did on negotiating with that VC. And so they called and said, "Would you be the VC? Would you do that?" And I said, "Well, yes, because I want to get to know you guys and participate." But the premise is a little wrong, because that's like negotiating a prenup. Winning a point could be not in your best interest when you're negotiating a prenup, because you're forming a lifetime partnership with somebody, or a years and years partnership with somebody. And so you're building trust. So venture investing is not a liquidity event. It's not a value creation event from the funding. It's a picking teams, picking the same color t-shirts, aligning incentives, and going off to do this project together that's going to make the world a better place. And so that's truly the way we view that. And so when we go into a technology with that view, there's people associated with that technology, whether that's an inventor or an entrepreneur, or whoever, there's people associated with that. And so we view it truly as sitting around a round table, putting all the facts and data points and personalities on the table and figuring out if there is a useful endeavor that we could do to make the world a better place on a massive transformational scale out of that group of data points and people. And we hope that there is. Most of the time there isn't. I often say, the right answer in venture 99% of the time is to say no, but by the way, you make no money at no. And so the difference between almost never and never is where we live. We almost always say no, but we make all our money and profit on that rare times that we say yes. And it's really hard to make check boxes of what that is. We try to look at that whole picture.
Have you ever made an investment in a transformative technology that became a very profitable incremental improvement company, or the other way around where you thought, well, this is incremental improvement and it ended up being transformative? Have you ever been in a company that had a massive pivot like that?
Sure. I've done both of those, and because you almost never get it all right. And I would never intentionally go into an incremental improvement, but I certainly have gone into incremental improvements by accident, and then you make the best of it. We had a company one time that I'll tell you the story of, it's all in the literature, that you could say, well, is it really transformational? But we won't debate that. I'll tell you what it was is a technology out of MD Anderson Hospital that took advantage of the fact that for acne, the P. acnes bacteria, you could heat the bacteria up to 119 degrees and it went into heat shock and died. But you didn't burn the skin until you got to 121 degrees. And so we created a device that heated to 120 degrees. I mean, I'm simplifying this a bit, and so you could put it on a pimple and you could kill all the bacteria with heat without burning the skin and make the pimple go away overnight. And we did an FDA trial. We became FDA approved. We showed that we could do that. And we built a company and we were growing, and it was elegant technology with real engineers and real technology. And we were doing really well, and revenue was going up, and we were in thousands and thousands of stores, and we were getting an entertaining competitive offers to buy us, and through my shoulder out of joint, patting myself on the back, and all was good. And a company in another country that I won't name, but it's fairly well known for not following all the IP and patent laws in the world, created a device that looked just like ours, that had a blue flashing LED light that did nothing, and sold it for 10% of what we were selling for, and put us out of business in less than a year because it looked just the same and was a lot cheaper. So as I say, it's the NFL. I mean, you got to know you're playing in the NFL. It's not easy.
No, it's not. It's not. So at TEDCO, we make early stage investments as well. We are usually not the lead investor because we want an organization like Santé to do diligence on the company and feel confident that the technology, the business plan, and that type of thing is heading in the right direction. And we focus on 3 different asset classes: social impact, seed, and venture. The seed and venture are right in your sweet spot. I think where we look at entrepreneurs, and it's exactly the same adage that you told us every time we saw you, betting on the jockey, not the horse. And I think that where we have probably a leg up on Santé is almost every single company that comes to us has a jockey. Whereas I remember lots of conversations with you where that's an awesome technology, Jack, but there's nobody riding that horse. We can't invest in that. Do you have entrepreneurs in residence? I know you've got an awesome network, as we talked about earlier, but do you have EIRs as well that you work with to form up those companies as they go?
Sure, we do. We have entrepreneurs in residence. We have partnerships with large academic medical centers and their incubator programs, their accelerator programs, and their EIRs. We have a network and partnerships with industry strategics where we co-develop programs with them. We have all of that, and you need all of that because there's not a single thing that means that the right entrepreneur with the right technology and the right innovator all come together at the same time. When it does, it's a wonderful thing, but you have a lot of near misses, and those near misses don't mean anything bad happened any more than just because an innovator CEO project fails means he was a bad CEO. We don't mind a company failing. We mind if it fails because of things that we could control or that we could have understood in advance. But if we're underwriting a risk and we're checking to see what Mother Nature thinks about that risk, and if Mother Nature didn't like it, there's a difference between a bad investment and a bad investment outcome. And we don't mind bad investment outcomes. We model that into the program. We don't view bad investment outcomes as bad investments. We made a bet that we could have known better is a bad investment. So we try to avoid that. So lining up, I've backed entrepreneurs that I've lost money with before, and I've not backed entrepreneurs that I made money with before. It's more complicated than that. But we're looking for the right entrepreneur, the right innovator, and the right technology to address the right market all at the right time. What fun.
Yeah. Well, we only worked together for less than 4 years, but your voice is still in the back of my mind every time we make decisions at TEDCO, and I really appreciate your guidance then, and I appreciate your taking time again today talking with us. Any last words of wisdom that you want to share with us?
I don't even know if I have first words of wisdom, but I always enjoy talking with you and working with you, Jack. You're a great guy.
That's great. So thanks, Dr. Cunningham, and I appreciate it. And that is all for us. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well.